You'll remember last month, the Republican chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, along with another senior Senate Republican, Lindsey Graham, sent a criminal referral to the Justice Department asking for an investigation of the former British spy Christopher Steele, who compiled the dossier, on the basis that they said there was evidence that he had lied to the FBI about his contacts with the media and the distribution of the dossier. Now, if you can come back to me just a second, you can see we have now received an unclassified version of that criminal referral, and you can see it's very heavily redacted. But buried within the document is a new allegation by the senators that Clinton associates also fed information to Steele. And it reads in part, "It is troubling enough that the Clinton campaign funded Mr. Steele's work, but that these Clinton associates were contemporaneously feeding Mr. Steele allegations raises additional concerns about his credibility." The names of the individuals are redacted in that document, and Senators Graham and Grassley are asking the Justice Department and FBI to now do an emergency declassification because they think much of the document should now be public because some of the information is consistent with what was in that House Intelligence Committee memo that was released on Friday. I think it's worth noting that it may be a case of overclassification by the FBI and Justice Department because there are portions where they redact the title of media reports, including a Washington Post report about the dossier, Sandra.
Any particulars on the information that you're learning that the Clinton associates fed to Steele, Catherine?
It's so heavily redacted, I wouldn't want to guess, but it's very clear. They make the allegation that Clinton associates were also feeding information to Steele at the same time he compiled this dossier, though they reached no conclusions over whether Steele in fact used that information or whether it was used by the FBI to verify elements of the dossier.
Our first guest says that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein will likely have to appear before Congress to explain his actions regarding the FISA warrants for members of the Trump campaign. Joining me now is Congressman Ron DeSantis, a member of several key committees, including Foreign Affairs, Judiciary, and Oversight. Congressman, before we get to the issue of Rosenstein, let's first talk about today's revelations. The fact that Clinton cronies were actually feeding information to Mr. Steele. Mr. Steele, of course, then put that information into the Trump dossier, and that was then fed to the FBI and led to the FISA warrant. It just keeps getting dirtier and dirtier.
It really does. I mean, you remember what the Nunes memo showed is what Bruce Orr was doing with his wife. Now, we knew Orr had met with Christopher Steele during the campaign. We knew Orr's wife, Nellie, worked for Fusion GPS. But what that showed is that there was a steady pipeline of information going from Steele and the people that he was getting information from to Nellie Orr directly to the Justice Department via Bruce Orr. And I think the revelations about the State Department are very similar. It's a pipeline between the Clinton campaign, members of the Obama administration, and the law enforcement agencies.
Now,
that's a huge problem.
It is.
That is not the way the government is supposed to operate. And to dig up dirt and launder it through the government bureaus, give me a break.
Well, particularly when that dirt was being created by a political campaign that was embroiled right in the middle of an election, just a couple of months before the election. Let me just ask about the State Department, because, of course, what first went through my mind is Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State. She must have had all these contacts there. Do you think she played a role in getting some of this dirt into the Trump dossier?
I think that's something we need to find out, but I would say she probably didn't need to do very much. I mean, what we've learned throughout this process is there are folks in some pretty high positions of power who are ostensibly nonpartisan, but had some really strong views that Donald Trump shouldn't be president, and they were going to do things to do that, like Peter Strzok.
Right.
So I would be willing to bet that there were probably folks in that agency who were predisposed to want to play this game and do what they can to hurt Donald Trump. And that's a problem. You can have your own views, David. That's not a big deal. But if that colors your official actions, that's the problem.
Using the full power of the FBI and the Justice Department to tilt the scales is not acceptable. All right, two senators, Grassley and Graham, have this criminal referral to the Justice Department because of what Mr. Steele did. Apparently, he lied to investigators when they asked him questions about whether he talked to the press. What happens with this criminal referral?
Well, I think the Attorney General needs to take it very seriously and potentially act on it. Now, there's a little bit of a disagreement about whether by doing that they actually think Steele was lying, or they're doing that to pry open maybe more information about what the FBI actually knew. In other words, yes, Steele may have been meeting with the press, but it doesn't mean that somehow the FBI didn't know all the information anyway. So whatever his representations were, maybe they were misleading, but maybe the FBI knew more than they let on. And that's important, David, because the representations they made in that FISA warrant, if they knew more than they let on, but then didn't disclose it to the court, that is a big deal.
Finally, Rod Rosenstein, the Assistant Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, he clearly played some role with regard to these FISA warrants, signed at least one of them. It's unknown exactly what he knew about the Trump dossier, whether he knew that it was completely paid for or at least overwhelmingly paid for by the Hillary campaign. What happens now with Mr. Rosenstein?
I think he does need to come in and answer questions about what he knew.
Behind closed doors, forgive me, or in open testimony?
I would prefer open, but if it's going to be in a classified setting, they have to do it behind closed doors. But I think he needs to say what he knew at the time, and then how was the FISA that he extended different than the original FISA? In other words, was there additional information that was put there? If he's just rehashing based off a Yahoo News article and the Steele dossier and then Papadopoulos, who's unrelated, well, man, that's really thin. And I think he'd have to answer some really hard questions about why he saw fit to sign that.
Here now, Fox News senior judicial analyst, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Judge, good to see you tonight.
Hey, where to start?
You know, just to sort of go back, because we've got a web of this up on the wall, which we're going to show everybody in a moment.
Right.
But to go back to what Ed was reporting there, it's outlined that a foreign source gave the information to in this dossier, second dossier, to an unnamed associate of Hillary and Bill Clinton. And this is all during the campaign,
right,
who then gives it to someone in the Obama State Department.
Right.
So give this to just leak this information over to them, who then gave the information to Steele. So it keeps going around and around and around, and you're looking for the foundation of where the meat is underneath it.
And at the same time this was happening, the FBI was conducting a fraudulent and deceptive investigation of Mrs. Clinton's improper handling of emails, arguably espionage, the failure to safeguard state secrets. So the Clintons were using enormous arms of the government, State Department, Justice Department, FBI, to assure that she not be prosecuted and to attempt to assure that Donald Trump not become president. But Steele, Chris Steele, the now former MI6, that's the British version of the CIA agent, presents a very interesting problem here. This is the issue. This is the wording in the memo that came out last week, the Republican memo, that the FBI and the DOJ fought aggressively against. And it's the following reference to Chris Steele as, quote, a longtime FBI asset. To most people, you'd say, all right, the FBI has all kinds of assets. Well, he is a former British intelligence agent. We have an agreement with the British government, Canadian, New Zealand, Australian. We will exchange information. We will not cherry-pick each other's agents. He apparently was cherry-picked by the FBI. If this happened while he was an MI6 agent, he could be prosecuted for espionage by the British government for being a British spy at the same time he was an American spy.
So that phrase in the memo that he was a longtime FBI asset, we know he was doing work for them. They were interested in his work. There's still, I think, some discrepancy over whether or not they were paying him, but they also say that they released him at some point.
Yes.
So they had some kind of relationship, whether it was monetary or not.
I think they had a monetary relationship, and at some point they decided either it wasn't credible or we can't trust you because you have become a leaker. And leaking classified material is a line that cannot be crossed, Mr. Steele, so you're no longer with us. Now, he left MI6 in 2009. This is very serious stuff. If before he left MI6, he was an FBI asset, the Justice Department and the FBI, which is not run today by the same people that were running it then. We're talking about Eric Holder and Jim Comey, has an enormous problem on its hand. That would explain.
2009 is a long time ago.
Correct.
We're talking about the 2016 campaign. But
Correct.
Can you prove that there was an overlap in his MI6 time and his FBI asset time?
We don't know.
But you know they were upset about that line in the memo.
Yes, and I know that Congressman Nunes intentionally used the ambiguous phrase "long time." Does it go back to 2009 or before, or did it happen afterwards? I also
That's
know
a question
that
we need to know.
that explains the ferocity with which the FBI tried to prevent this from coming out.
Thank you, Judge. We'll stay on it with your help. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you. God bless you. And God bless America.